do admit that we are a free society. That
we're admitted. I insist upon it. I insist that we are a free society and that the Soviet Union is a dungeon, and therefore we have completely different methods of population control. Completely different methods. In fact, I've written a lot about this. There's no moral equivalence here. The totalitarian. I mean, there's nothing. No state is truly totalitarian. But as we move toward the totalitarian end of the spectrum, the technique of control is roughly that satirized by Orwell. You have a center of truth. You have a ministry of truth. It announces official truths. People can believe it or not. Nobody cares very much. It's sufficient that they obey. Totalitarian states can be more or less behavioristic. They don't really care what people think because they always have a club at hand to beat them over the head if they do the wrong thing.
Force people to do what they want to do.
As long as they can think what they like in private, but they better do what we tell them in public. That's the model towards which totalitarian states tend. As a result, the propaganda may very well be not too effective. On the other hand, a democratic state can't use those mechanisms.
You can't force anybody.
You can't force people. Therefore, you have to control what they think. Since power is still concentrated, but in different hands in our society, largely in private ownership, and you can't control people by force, you'd better care what they think. So that's why you have to have other forms, and in fact more sophisticated forms of indoctrination.
I did an interview once with Edward Bernays, who was considered the pioneering figure in American business public relations, and he talked through there about the engineering of consent.
Yeah, that's his phrase. Yeah. And he thought it was a wonderful thing. In fact, he described it as the essence of democracy.
Yeah, he said if the consent of the government presupposes that efforts at persuasion, at trying to persuade people to see things your way.
Notice the picture. The picture is certain people are in a position to persuade, and the essence of democracy is that they have the freedom to persuade. Now, who has the freedom to persuade? Well, who runs the public relations industry? It's not the special interests. They're the targets of the public relations industry. Public relations industry is a major industry, closely linked to other corporations. And those are the people who have the power to persuade. That's the essence of democracy. Yeah, and they must engineer the consent of others.
There was a vice president of AT&T in 1909 who said he thought the public mind was the chief danger to the company.
Exactly. The general public might have funny ideas about corporate control. For example, people who really believe in democracy, people who take 18th century values seriously, people who really might merit the term conservatives, that much abused term, are against concentration of power. They remember that after all, the doctrines of the Enlightenment held that individuals should be free from the coercion of concentrated power. The kind of concentrated power that they were thinking about was the church and the state and the feudal system and so on. And that you could sort of imagine a population of relatively equal people, at least equal white male property owners, who would be not controlled by those private powers. But in the subsequent period, a new form of power developed, namely corporations, with highly concentrated power over decision-making in economic life. That is, the control over what's produced, what's distributed, what's invested, and so on and so forth, is very narrowly concentrated.
So this is why the vice president of a large corporation would say the public mind is the chief
public mind might have funny ideas about democracy, which say that we should not be forced simply to rent ourselves to the people who own the country, and own its institutions. Rather, we should play a role in determining what those institutions do. That's democracy. If we were to move towards democracy, and I think democracy even in the 18th century sense, we would say that there should be no maldistribution of power in determining what's produced, what's distributed, what's invested, and so on. Rather, that should be that's a problem for the entire community. In fact, there are, in my own personal view, unless we move in that direction, human society probably isn't going to survive.